Good day, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about one of the macromolecules called carbohydrates. Here's your target. Students know most macromolecules, large molecules, proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, in cells are synthesized from a small collection of simple parts. Really, the main thing is you take small parts and you can make bigger parts. I know, brilliant idea, really, but it's just a little bit more complicated than that. All right, so by the end, you should be able to tell me a few things. You should be able to tell me some examples. You're going to be able to tell me what we use carbohydrates for. You should be able to tell me the chemical formula for glucose and be able to recognize other sugars. What is lost when you combine two molecules of sugar, and then be able to name some sugars that we can't digest, or really carbohydrates we can't digest. Okay, so carbohydrates come in many forms. Some common ones are sugars. That's usually what you think of carbohydrates. Nice big piece of cake or something. So sugars like glucose, fructose, sucrose. If you notice, all those end with OSE. So that's really important. If you're just on a test, you see OSE, just you know it's going to be a carbohydrate. Carbohydrates are high energy. That's why if you're trying to diet, you stay away from them. So sucrose, glucose, fructose, all carbohydrates all end in OSE. All right, so if you have one molecule of a saccharide, you have a monosaccharide. Mono means one, saccharide means sugar, so monosaccharide. Here you can see there's kind of two different ways of drawing it. There's the chain form on the left and the ring form on the right. They both show the same sort of things, just a different shape. And notice again, they're both C6H12O6. That's the formula for a saccharide. All right, so you see fructose. Fructose is a monosaccharide. It's what makes that apple nice and sweet. There's other monosaccharides like glucose and galactose. I just chose this one because I found a pretty picture. And remember, C6H12O6. All right, so here we have a disaccharide. Disaccharide has two monosaccharides put together. When you do that, you lose a couple of atoms, if you notice, so it's C12H22O11. An example of a disaccharide is what you guys normally think of as sugar, table sugar, what you put on your cereal, sucrose. Sucrose comes from processing either sugar canes or sugar beets. So you guys will normally think sugar as a disaccharide. So one of the ways to make one of these disaccharides, or really the only way, is through something called dehydration synthesis. Think if you are dehydrated, you've lost water, you lost it. So you lose an H from one of the sugars and an OH from the other monosaccharide. You put those together and you get a disaccharide. It forms what's called a glycosidic bond. Glyco means sugar, so a sugar bond, so that makes sense. So again, remember, to form a disaccharide like sucrose, you lose a water, a H and an OH. You're going to make a glycosidic bond. All right, feel free to pause this for a little bit. You can look up the answers, look back at your notes, but go ahead and answer. What's an example of a carbohydrate? And then you're going to have to do a little research or predicting. Tell me what's the difference between a monosaccharide and a polysaccharide. So if you do lots of those glycosidic bonds, if you put many of the monosaccharides together, you're going to get a chain of them. Here you see 3, but usually it's like thousands of them. So if you have greater than 2 molecules of a saccharide put together, you get a polysaccharide. And a lot of the plants, they store their food as polysaccharides. So when we eat plants, a lot of times we get polysaccharides for our energy. All right, so starch is one of the most common polysaccharides that we eat all the time. It has lots of energy. All those bonds in it get broken down and they turn into energy. So potatoes have starch. They are a plant. That's where they store their energy. So starch is a polysaccharide. So you see a picture of bread. Bread is not a plant, but if you think about it, it comes from a plant. It comes from wheat or barley, something like that, which are plants. So they've been refined and the sugars have been taken out and they're in that bread now. So in order to use that, we break down the bonds in between those thousands of monosaccharides that have been turned into a polysaccharide, and that releases the energy. And that's called hydrolysis. So you add water, you're going to break down those bonds and release the energy. It's a little bit more complicated, but that's basically what it is. Hydrolysis, water breaking. It's the exact opposite of dehydration synthesis, which takes energy to make things. So hydrolysis, again, that's how we break those bonds, release the energy. All right, so here's another time to see what you know. What type of bond results from the creation of a disaccharide, and then predict what type of reaction you're going to have if two glucose molecules join up together. Feel free to pause it, do whatever you need here. Take your time, think about that, and answer those. All right, so sugars and starches, they're not the only types of carbohydrates. There are other types of carbohydrates that are really useful. Do you think you know what these are? Go ahead and write down, predict it, pause it, make a challenge to your neighbor or something, and then you'll see if you're right in just a second. So if you guessed wood, you're kind of right. Cellulose is what makes the cell walls for trees. It's what makes trees rigid. All plants have cell walls made of cellulose. It's what lets them stand up straight. It's a critical key component. Though we can't break that down. So when we eat plants, we're not getting our energy from the cellulose. We get it from the starches and other sugars that they have. We can't break it down. So if you have eaten corn one time and seen it a little bit later, that's because that outer layers has lots of cellulose in it. Grass, you can't just go eat some grass. Cows can, but that's because they have special digestive system that has bacteria that actually break it down and eat it for them and do the digestion for them. So you have to have special adaptations to break down cellulose. If you guessed bug or insect on that previous question I asked, you're still kind of right. The hard shell is made of chitin. All arthropods have it, so things like shrimp, lobster, spiders, scorpions, all those sorts of things, they have this chitinous shell. It's hard, it's what gives them their exoskeleton, it's how they move around, all that good stuff. And we can't digest these either. So if you go and you eat a lobster, you don't eat the shell part. It's not going to taste good. The only thing that'd be able to digest it is, again, things like specialized bacteria. All right, so here's two more questions. Tell me an example of a polysaccharide, and what do you think is going to be different between cellulose and chitin? What's different? They're similar in some ways, but they're different in others. Why do you think that is? One's a bug, one's a tree, All right, so now's your chance to go back. Make sure you have left-hand questions. Make sure you have a very good summary. Don't tell me today I learned about carbohydrates. Tell me 2 or 3 things you actually learned. All right, so I gave you these questions at the beginning. Now you have them again. See if you can answer them. What is a carbohydrate? What's an example? What do we use them for? What's the chemical formula for glucose? You have to know that one. What's molecules lost when you combine 2 molecules of sugar? And then what are some carbohydrates we can't digest?